checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Until then, stay safe and keep it weird.
What on earth happened then to the intro?
That's what happens when I get a new computer and I press the wrong button.
Oh, see, because you're running a Mac now as well instead of your usual PC. And I promise you, it's going to be so much smoother.
Tiny. I should have the readers on.
It's going to
be interesting.
It's going to be so much smoother when you use this Mac I've bought you, or the company's bought you. Don't use those PCs anymore.
Exactly, Jennifer. Oh my goodness.
Speaking of the reliability of Macs, though, we're very lucky to have the guest we have come back, because he's a high profile guest. And the last time we had him booked, you got COVID, and then I was going to do the show just with him myself, and then my MacBook, my old MacBook, literally died the evening of the show. He was going to.
Yes, I know. I was so surprised by it. I'm like, uh-oh.
It was just that double case. But there also might be a little bit of a curse involved with the story that everything failed the last time we should have the guest on. And because we ran into the little tech failure, instead of chitter-chattering too long, I think I'll roll straight into his introduction, because we're so excited to have him. He's the author of Ghosts of Salem and was featured in The Curse of Lizzie Borden, which is just a fantastic documentary. He has penned more than a dozen paranormal-themed books, including Mass Murders and Ghosts of the American Revolution. He has been featured on several national TV shows, including the Travel Channel's A Haunting, Most Terrifying Places, Haunted Towns, and Haunted USA. In 2020, he made a cameo on several television programs, including Paranormal Nightshift, Most Terrifying with Jason Hawes, and Forbidden History. He also appeared in Fright Club with the Ghost Brothers and Jack Osbourne on Discovery Plus. He's a sought-after lecturer who speaks at libraries and paranormal-related events across the country, and in the past he has worked for VH1, MTV.com, Newswork, and ABC Radio. And he's also worked as a regional stringer for the New York Times. So it is my great pleasure to welcome to the show Sam Baltrusis. Greetings, Sam. The Curse of Lizzie Borden is still haunting Talking Weird.
Yeah, as I was talking earlier, like I not only did the Curse of Lizzie Borden like curse my family, but curse every radio show that I've done since the Curse of Lizzie Borden. Like pretty much, there's been camera failure, lights going out. I don't know what's going on exactly, but I do know that things are pretty much cursed when I'm on a radio show or a podcast.
Wow. Did the curse carry? We won't talk too much about that, Docker, because as fascinating as it is, I know we've got so many other things to get to, but did that curse travel with you in other ways other than these type of tech show problems we're talking about?
Yeah. So if you watch The Curse of Lizzie Borden, the way I'm related to Lizzie Borden not once but twice. So we looked into the idea possibly of a generational curse that links all of our family members. And some of the family members that are linked together are shocking, like Eileen Wuornos. We're related to her. So both myself and Lizzie Borden's related to Eileen Wuornos, who was a serial killer in Florida. We're related to Marilyn Monroe as well. So there's a lot of people that we're related to that just really was shocking. And so when we did the Curse of Lizzie Borden, things started happening on set, and that did continue months after, and it's still continuing now. We filmed February of 2021, and I will say that I've had things happen, like I had an attachment follow me home after that. The seance that we did, and I thought it was done. We let it go, but there was retaliation after. The dark entity that we were dealing with on set followed me home and attacked me.
Oh,
It was bad.
my. How were you able to get rid of it?
So, so I'm clairvoyant. So I basically see these things. I was lying in bed. It's like 3 a.m. I felt like I was having a pretty dark dream, and I felt like my hand, like someone was covering my mouth. I wake up, and I actually hear this voice say, "Sam, wake up! Sam, wake up!" And maybe be one of my guides, or it sounded like a male voice was trying to wake me up. And I woke up, and there was this hand with long claws covering my mouth, and I was like struggling to wake up. I jump out of bed, and then I actually reach out to my friend Joni Mahan, who's my co-host on Paranormal Rewind. And if you watch A Haunting, she's actually saved my life before. I reached out to her, and she calls a shaman, Michael Robichaud, who did a removal the time that I had an attachment that nearly killed me. So she reached out to him, and he did a removal like 4 a.m. So it was pretty scary, and I think that there was retaliation. There was a lot of anger toward me and towards Chris Fleming, who also got attacked too, by the way, for doing the seance and for doing what we did at the Lizzie Borden during the Curse of Lizzie Borden.
Were you ever able to identify what the entity was that followed you home or came home with you?
Yeah, so I mean, my description of it was definitely ancient. It was a very old, like elemental in nature. When we did Curse of Lizzie Borden, they gave a name to it. It was, I don't want to say the name, but it was a envelope. And I don't necessarily know if that's what I was dealing with, but it was dealing with something that was long before Lizzie Borden, and it was it looked like a tree monster. If I can kind of like see what it looked like. What I think that was actually human at one point? No, it was inhuman, very, very much not a human. Could have been something that we picked up in the woods, because we did an investigation in the woods as well. So whatever it was retaliating against me, because while we were doing the seance, I was protecting everyone in the room along with Chris Fleming. So he and I were protecting Dave Schrader and Luann Jolly. Dave was to my right, Luann was to my left. We're also crossing spirits over too. So there was a lot going on there. And we put the dark entity that we were dealing with we kind of bound him, but we didn't get rid of him completely. I mean, we just kind of pushed him to the side while we opened up the portal to the other side to let the spirits go through.
Oh, wow. So when you do that, do you think when you're opening a portal, could something else like come through that shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, it's super dangerous. And looking back at the Curse of Lizzie Borden, that was probably the most dangerous thing I've ever worked on. And I, like a lot of like a cautionary to like, don't do this, don't channel. Like when I channeled Eliza Borden, that was 100% real. People are like, was that act? Like I've never acted one day in my life. That was 100% me being taken over by Eliza Borden, not remembering what was going on. But that's so dangerous. When you let a spirit that emotional take you over, it's gonna leave sort of this psychic residue on you. So that was dangerous. The seance was a huge no-no. I would never recommend doing that unless you're doing a seance with Dave Schrader and Chris Fleming. I had two of the best in the field to do a seance with, but it still was super dangerous. And I see a lot of these other shows like I just watched the Scream. There was the Scream, the True Story with Cindy Kaza.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, I watched it last night, and I was thinking throughout the whole thing, I'm like, you know what? They're putting Cindy in danger. Like they had her with blindfolds, like blindfolded, and had earphones on, kind of like when I was channeling with Dave Schrader. And the thing is, it's such a dangerous thing to put someone like myself or Cindy Kaza with something that may be potentially inhuman. She was channeling the darkness, and that's not good for us.
Well, there was even an automatic writing session too. That was kind of crazy.
The way she connects through automatic. Oh, you mean Dave Schrader? Yeah, Dave did automatic. Yeah, like so Cindy is known for her automatic writing. That's how she connects with spirit. But in the Scream documentary, she actually I've never seen her channel, and she doesn't channel, but because of the experiment, they had her put on the earphones and the blindfold, and she was channeling, and it was kind of foreign for her because it's not something she normally does, and you can see her physically getting ill on camera. So I just don't. I think that the for a producer, I'm a producer myself, so I know we want to tell the story and tell the story correctly. We also want it to be like a little scary, but sometimes when you are working with real people and real, like, potentially demonic entities, you want to be super careful with your talent and make sure that they're protected, because it's taken me a year to recover from Curse of Lizzie Borden, and talking to Chris and talking to Dave and talking to Luann, we've all been affected after the camera stopped rolling.
Is that an ongoing problem, do you think, in the industry? Like, is the talent consistently put in positions to get those more exciting shows or bigger scares, and the producers don't really take? I mean, you're a producer, but you're conscious of it because you're actually you have psychic abilities as well. But I'm guessing a producer who's just somebody who his bottom line is just making a show and doesn't really have a background in understanding a lot of this mightn't take that same type of precautions that you might going into a situation like that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed working both behind the camera and in front of the camera, you get a lot of times you have producers who are television producers who've been producers for 20, 30 years, and they have that experience, so they want to put on a really good show, but they don't have paranormal experience. So I've been lucky to have worked with producers who do have that paranormal experience, but they have the, sort of like, okay, put Sam out in the middle of the woods and have him channel Anvelo. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to channel Anvelo in the middle of the woods. It's like not what's going to happen. So I would like to see more of an emphasis on producers and people doing these shows having some sort of experience in the paranormal. If you're working with people like Cindy or like myself or like Amy Allen, to be able to understand the dangers that they're being put into when they're going to these darker cases. I mean, we see the leader of this, of course, is Ghost Adventures and what Zach is doing, and a lot of the situations he gets himself into is through provocation. He'll provoke the spirits. I'm very much against provoking, and I do think that he has taken a different approach to investigating over the years. But when you first saw him investigating in the early days, it was very much a provocation type investigation, and I think that has kind of, I guess, maybe given the wrong message to other producers and other shows, that's how you do it, and it's not how you do it. It's not. You have to be as respectful. If you want the spirits to respond to you, you have to be respectful to them and treat them like human beings. And if you're dealing with an inhuman entity, it's probably best not to put a blindfold on a person or a bag over their head and expect them to like confront the evil. It's not safe. It's not safe for them to do that.
I think Hellier did a lot to popularize the Estes method and those type of investigative methods, I suppose. What other newer methodologies are you seeing coming down either the actual TV show kind of paranormal track or the actual paranormal investigation track, which you might think are dangerous or helpful or different or worth talking about?
Well, what I really like seeing about these investigation shows, having people like myself on the show that has sensitivity. When you look at sort of the original Ghost Hunters, the Ghost Hunters methodology is not to have psychics on set. So I do like that they're bringing on sensitives and and people that have different gifts to be able to, like, I'm a psychometrist, so I can go and read the land and give you some backstory. I love the Estes method. I use it often. If you use the Estes method, you use usually a Spirit Box 7. You use noise cancellation earphones, and you also will have a blindfold. So I think that actually helps me channel, but it's also can be very dangerous. So when you're under, you have to be really cognizant of the person that's doing it, because they may be channeling whatever is coming through. And you look at people that are doing some of the shows, they're doing the Estes method, like Kindred Spirits, they do it often. I think that it may not be as dangerous, say, for the leads on that show versus, say, Cindy Kaza doing it, who is as sensitive, because she's gonna be channeling in addition to hearing what's coming through on the Spirit Box 7. So I think that you have to look at the person that you have and what they're doing. I mean, my gifts are so strong that I can walk at a location. I don't need earphones and a Spirit Box 7 to communicate. So I can just literally go in and read it. I like using tools though, like my dowsing rods, or I use pendulums a lot too. So I'm kind of old school in the tools that I use. So I'm excited about looking at old school tools again, and using like an old tape recorder, maybe using a Polaroid camera as opposed to sort of like the digital cameras. So I'm big about old school and revisiting those tools out in the field.
Yeah, I enjoy those too. I'm trying to revisit them myself because I haven't got to use them that much. But I've noticed with the dowsing rods, it's really kind of hard to tell whether or not someone's not moving, or how do you?
Yeah. So for me, I was not a huge dowsing rod fan until I found the right pair. So for me, like, it's almost like a wand. So if you're like Harry Potter and you're like looking for your magic wand, I found the right pair. I actually got them charged, and for accuracy. So when I'm holding them, it's really important that also too, when people are holding their dowsing rods, is not to hold the bottom. So some people actually don't know how to hold them properly. So you let them you kind of freestand, and you ask yes or no questions. If it's yes, it'll cross. So do I have a spirit with me now? Yes. Is it related to Lizzie Borden? No. Is it one of my spirit guides? Yes. Okay, so and you also pretty much like a spirit board, you want to be able to you want to close it. So my spirit guide, I'm going to let you go now, okay? And it'll say yes. So the goal really is to kind of have dowsing rods that work for you and your energy. And I'm also, a lot of people ask me too, is like, do I feel like that the spirits are moving the dowsing rods? I don't. I think it's tapping into my psychic ability. So it's sort of like a tool for me to use to kind of like validate what I'm picking up. But it kind of, the yes or no is what I'm somehow giving it. So I don't think that spirits are moving it back and forth. And that's what I think one of the bigger misconceptions is that people think that the spirits are doing it. It's really, I think, my subconscious doing it, but it's my psychic subconscious doing that.
Yeah. I've always wondered that too, because I had gotten a new pair of dowsing rods, and I let my daughter try it. And it was working really well. So I'm like, I don't know. Is she willing this? Because this is in my house. So I was a little surprised by how well it was working with her. So I've always wondered if someone could actually will it, or if it was legit, a spirit.
And you can do experiments too, and you can like kind of close your eyes and say, and try to make your mind do it. And I have tried to do that before, and it actually didn't work for me. But I have seen people do it. So I just think that you use it as like with the idea that it's a tool to tap into your abilities. And sometimes there's some situations where they don't let you use any tools whatsoever. So I filmed something recently that I can't give you details about, but they were like, you can't use your dowsing rods, you can't do this. And I'm like, what am I going to use? Like, I'm just going to use my, like I was out there in the middle of the woods, like feeling like using my psychometry. And I think that I like having tools that it's kind of like a way for me to validate what I'm picking up.
Maybe tell us a little bit about, sorry, you go, Jen, you go.
I was just going to ask about Ouija boards, because he hasn't mentioned that one yet. What's your thoughts on those?
I personally, I've talked about this before. I personally am not a big fan of spirit boards. I think that they're kind of like a communication tool. I think they could be used for good, and they can also tap into things that you don't know that you're tapping into. I will say that every time I've seen something go really bad, I'm like, was there a spirit board or a Ouija board used before? And they're like, yep, and I'm like, okay, it's sort of like this trope in the paranormal world that you have a spirit board. However, I work in, I've given tours in Salem, and that's sort of where the spirit board started. Parker Brothers, that's where they were. So spirit boards it's a game, and I think that it's really your intention. If you want to conjure a demon, you probably can, and it depends on what you want to do.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you would use, say, your dowsing rods when you were approaching the cases in, say, Ghosts of the American Revolution, and you were at a location or at a site. How might you incorporate that into the investigation of what you were looking at?
So when I write my books, specifically Ghosts of the American Revolution, I just I let the ghosts guide me. So I will, I started off because I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and actually live in Somerville. And there was a situation where I was doing a spirit box session out by Prospect Hill, which is this old fortification where some of the soldiers camped out. And I kept getting the word huzzah over and over again. I'm like, what the heck is that? What's huzzah? And that's basically like yay back in the 1700s, and that kind of started off this fascination. I'm a historian in addition to being an author, so I love history. It gave me a perfect excuse to go to some of these extremely haunted Revolutionary War locations, places that I didn't really know had Revolutionary War backstory, like New York City. I lived in New York City for about 8 years. And I was able to revisit some of the locations that I've been to before, like the Morris Jumel Mansion, and like I went to like the location where like Francie's Tavern, where so a lot of Revolutionary War history happened, and also Staten Island had a huge Revolutionary War history as well. I went to Philadelphia and retraced Ben Franklin's footsteps, and he's been reported multiple times. Apparently, Ben Franklin gets around; his ghost does, and so when I go, do I walk around with my dowsing rods? No, I just kind of go to all the locations, kind of just check it out. And as a clairvoyant, sometimes I'll think things will happen as I'm out in the field. And so I actually did have a situation where I went to all the locations that Ben Franklin's ghost was spotted. Didn't really have much of an experience with Ben Franklin until the very end. So I go to what was, it's this museum now, but what was his house before. Down below, there was this glass partition, and you can see down below to sort of the foundation and what was the privy. And I'm like, oh, what the privy is that the bathroom? I was kind of talking to myself out loud, and there was this man's voice behind me. He was like, yeah, that's where George Washington relieved himself. And he said it kind of with an old English accent, and it was a lot more crass than the way I'm saying it. And he said, that's where George Washington relieved himself. And I turned around, there was nobody there. So I do know that Ben Franklin has a potty mouth, and probably was that Ben Franklin communicating with me? I think it was. I mean, I spent the whole day trying to connect with him, and of course he's going to make a potty mouth humor joke while we're out in the freezing cold outside of his former home.
I think you mentioned in the book a little as well about the difference between actual haunting presence or something which is like an imprint or a record playing again and again. Can you talk a little bit about that and give some examples?
Yeah, so I strongly believe that a lot of the hauntings associated with the American Revolution and also with the Civil War are residual hauntings, so they're not necessarily intelligent like what we were dealing with in the Curse of Lizzie Borden. I think that was definitely intelligent. Residual is like a videotape replay that happens over and over again, and you see that a lot specifically with battles and also with people. With lighthouses, you'll see that a lot in lighthouses, people going up and down the stairs. So it's something that is repetitive in nature. Soldiers, you see them sort of like on guard and maybe reliving the last moments of their lives before they were shot at the battlefield. So residual hauntings are very common, specifically in the American Revolution. But something that came up in my book, I interviewed Brian J. Cano for the book, and he brought up something that kind of blew my mind. And it was the idea that maybe these residual hauntings have a shelf life. So So, like for example, like we may see ghosts of the American Revolution, but they may be getting less and less as years progress because it's so far away. And so maybe we'll see more Civil War hauntings as opposed to hauntings that happened in the American Revolution, which is true. I mean, there's definitely more Civil War residual hauntings than there are American Revolution. And the American Revolution hauntings, you may not have heard of a specific haunting for like 30 or 40 years because maybe it had a shelf life, maybe it had an expiration date.
As somebody with a psychic ability or a sensitive ability, can you, when you're experiencing the difference between something which is residual or something which is more conscious, how do you tell that, or how do you feel the difference there?
Well, that's a good question. So for me, like I kind of identify as a psychic time traveler. So when I go to a location, I can touch an object or be in a location and literally flash back in time, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's really, really profound. And usually it's something that wants to be told and told correctly. So yeah, I mean, I think that when I see a replay, like a psychic replay, that's what I mean. Like that's like a sort of like an imprint that was so important that it's sort of like it psychically imprinted itself on the land. And you see that with battles. You see that with the Boston massacre. I feel like that imprinted on the land where the massacre took place. You see that, and also positive things too, where you like say John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Like, that's not positive, but when he announced his candidacy for being president or running for president, you still feel that at the Parker House in Boston. So some things are good, some things are not so good, but you can pick up on the energy at the location in the psychic replay. Now, if it's something that is not residual, is more intelligent, you'll see it almost like it's the person, but the person doesn't have feet for me. So I will sometimes and as I'm getting stronger and stronger with my gifts as a clairvoyant, it's getting harder and harder to kind of tell what's a person and what's a ghost.
Oh my.
Jen, I mean, Jen, do you have that problem? Are you clairvoyant, or are you just more empathic?
Well, I'm just now taking classes to make them stronger, because when I was younger, I learned not to because of my family's religion. I mean, it was like thrown aside, So I'm learning to just accept it and let it be. So I'm not anywhere near where you're at.
It takes years of working the muscle to be able to do that. I will say, I also was terrified of the gift for most of my adult life, and definitely through my childhood. I mean, I had it as a child as well. Put on paranormal blinders. Things were still happening, but I was just so scared. And I also thought, I grew up in the Bible Belt in Florida, so they were like, if you talked or saw dead people or communicated with dead people, you were from the devil. I mean, like that's kind of how I was raised, and I it's just one of those things that I was so afraid that I was going to go to hell because those things were happening to me that I fought it for most of my life, and until the point where I actually got sober about 12 years ago, and when it was still happening and happening actually more frequent, I'm like, you know what? It's who I am. I have to accept it, and I decided just to work the muscle. My first few books that I wrote, like The Ghost of Boston and even Ghosts of Salem, I used the words like alleged a lot, because I'm like, allegedly haunted location, and like I knew that it was haunted because I saw stuff. But you'll see me as it progressed in my books become more and more I guess less afraid and more willing to share my gifts in the books as I progress, because I do think that works in tandem. You can still do the research, and you can still kind of like give your clairvoyant perceptions at a location and watch how a lot of times they mesh together. So it's a really nice. It's, as an author, I love it. I love the formula. Like to go in. A lot of times I go in these locations very cold, and I don't even know the historical backstory. And then I find out what the ghosts tell me, and then I validate it with history.
Wow. So what about, since we're talking about your gifts, so one of my very first questions that I normally ask is, what got you into the paranormal? So when did you start realizing that you had that gift?
So it started when I was really young, and I have been talking a lot about this with my family because I kind of like, because it's something that I didn't talk about for a long time, and now that they've all seen the shows, and they're like, "Oh, that's that's what you used to do. That's why you did this," and that kind of thing. But when I was younger, I saw my grandfather, and my grandfather passed away when I was very young. We went back to his home. It was granddaddy's house, and so my parents divorced. We lived in Chicago. We go back to Florida. I actually ended up sleeping in my grandfather, who passed, his room when we moved back to his house. And so when I'm there, I get what appeared to be like a download after he passed of all the information. And it turns out my grandfather was also gifted too. And a lot of it was very, very scary. I remember the download, and it was during a dream and just being mortified and kind of like being like almost like pent to my bed. And then after that, like I started seeing dead people, including my grandfather. And my grandfather has been my guide figure through most of my life. But I've also had my grandmother has been my guide figure, and other people have guided me throughout the journey as well. But it got so terrifying that I put on blinders because I had a situation when I was probably around 10 years old that just was so mortifying for me. And my sister and I finally just talked about it because she's experienced it too. And it was at one of our childhood homes growing up. And I don't want to talk about it, but it was just really terrifying for me. And it may have been actually not a ghost, but an ET. And that's something that I am terrified of aliens. So I can deal with ghosts all day long, but I'm like, no aliens.
Yeah.
We need to have you on another show and convince you to talk about that story, because that's my pet topic is probably ETs. But just when you mentioned the idea that some people might suggest it's all from the devil or something like that, have there been times where something's presented itself, say, as a human spirit, and you've gone, no, I think you're demonic or you're something else?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So when you're clairvoyant, they sometimes try to trick you. So you think that you're interacting with humans and trying to be able to tell the difference between a human entity versus something that's portraying as a human entity. And that's a really good question. I'm kind of in a school that 99% of the spirits that I interact with they're all disembodied souls, so they're not necessarily inhuman. However, I have dealt with an inhuman entity before. Every time I talk about this thing, something happens, so be prepared for the camera to go completely because whatever. So I was working overnights at a hotel in Salem. It became this ongoing relationship with a man wearing a hat. So I had an experience with the Hatman. And that's gone on over and over and over again. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but that also was what happened to me as a child too. So this has been something that I've experienced for on and off my whole life. And so this is not human. It may be extraterrestrial. I'm kind of in a school that the shadow figure is interdimensional, so it's from another dimension. So I think that's the school that I'm in when it comes to whatever I'm dealing with, but I don't necessarily think it's from the devil. I just think that it's something inhuman for sure.
So have you experienced sleep paralysis or something like that then?
I have in the past. Like when I described when I was being held down by the thing with the long nails, like that was inhuman too. So, but that was not the same as the man wearing a hat. So not really. I had, if you watch the 100th episode of A Haunting, I had an attachment. So I'm prone to attachments. And I haven't had one in several years, but the last one that I had was Richard Crowninshield. So it was actually a human that was a murderer. I channeled him without knowing I channeled him, and I didn't push him out. So when you looked at, for example, when you watched The Curse of Lizzie Borden, I was channeling Eliza Borden. I knew how to push her out, but back when I was channeling Richard Crowninshield, I did not know how to push him out. And that's like when I had to accept my gift as a clairvoyant. So he was still kind of inside me and was taking over my body. So that's something that I had definitely had sleep paralysis then, to the point where I was potentially like levitating in my bed.
Oh, wow.
How did you get rid of that, Sam?
Like Joni Mahan. So if you watch the episode of A Haunting, Joni Mahan knew something was wrong. She's my co-host of Paranormal Rewind. We're just friends at the time. She had an attachment that nearly killed her too. So she knew what the signs were. And I was posting kind of macabre things on social media, like, I'm like, hey, does anyone have a skeleton? And like, yeah, I have a Halloween skeleton. But no, I want a real human cadaver. And like, it was really macabre things that it's not my nature. And she actually reached out to me. She's like, Sam, something's wrong with you. I'm like, Joni, I'm like, help me. Like, and something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. And then she reached out to Michael Robichaud. He actually did a removal, and I saw the entity leave my body. So it was pretty bad.
Oh wow! So
do we lose Dean?
There's probably a little situation with a cute little 5-year-old right now.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that's what happened. So you kind of experienced sleep paralysis, and you had mentioned Hatman, ET, blah, 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 right? So I've experienced stuff like that majority of my life, and I've always wondered if it was a spirit or if it was something interdimensional, as you've talked about. Like when I had one, a really interesting one when I was 14, where I was asleep and I had total sleep paralysis, but 4 beings came into my room. And to where I was just like completely like, I knew they were there and they were talking to me, but I couldn't, but it was telepathically. I literally left my body. That's how scared I was. So I was like floating up high enough to where I could see beings, but I couldn't tell what they were. So was that an ET? Was that spirits? What was that?
Well, I mean, Jen, I think the difference between that situation, like sleep paralysis, because I had that when I was sleeping and the hand over my mouth, that was sleep paralysis. When I saw the man with the hat, I was working the overnight shift at a hotel, so I was wide awake when I saw him. So I wasn't in a sleep state when I saw him.
Okay.
And so that's a difference, I think, and like, yeah, you can argue, like, I know that people that are skeptical, they're like, if you're in a sleep state, your mind is gonna have these, these experiences with, like whether it's potential ETs but I'm in a school and I've been in your situation before where my dreams are really profound and often prophetic, and you can tell the difference between one of those dreams versus sort of like other dreams that you may have. So I'm in a school that what you were experiencing was real, but whether or not, what was it? That's the question. And like why was it the same? Is it recurring, Jen, or was it something that I mean, you said it's your whole life? Was it the same kind of entity, or?
I think it visited a couple of more times around that time, but I actually knew there was 4 in the room, so that was different. Normally it was like 1 or 2. So how did I know it was 4? I think it's just because I just left my body because I was so scared. I don't know.
Yeah, weird. It's terrifying. And I also, I mean, like if that was ETs, I would just be like, I'm like, oh my God. That's like my worst fear. But like when I was a kid, like, so I saw, like, mine was a hat man, but it was like, he was like peeking through, we had this big window, and my sister and I were talking about it. She's like, that window always scared me, and I'm like, there was something always peeking through the window. So for me, like, we were always trying to go to sleep. We wanted the light on, and my mom and my stepdad would always like turn off the light, and we're like, we want the lights on because there was something in the room. And so I experienced that, for most of my childhood, and I didn't talk to my sister about it until about 2 months ago. Like, I'm like, did you experience, the street was called Satcham Road, so did you experience anything in the house in Satcham Road? She's like, oh my God, like every night there was something in my room. And I'm like, okay, at least I know that we're not alone. I felt like I was the only one that experienced that, but my sister did too. She's about a year and a half younger than I am.
Yeah. But does she have any gifts too, or she just...
Well, I mean, we always joke, like, because I've always been the gifted, like, I've always been the one that's been super sensitive. She's like really tough and not sensitive, but her telling me that she experienced that too kind of says she probably does have sensitivity. And we've investigated together, but nothing really dramatic. But I think she's really scared, and I was scared too. So I get why my sister's scared as well. We had a pretty scary haunted house experience as a child. So I get why she's terrified, and I get why I was terrified for 25, 30 years. It was a long time.
Yeah. It's a long time to be scared, for sure. That'll do a lot to you.
I mean, but Jim, weren't you? I mean, I would be terrified if I saw 4 beings in my room. Like, were you terrified? Like, how did you feel about that? Was it like you wanted to know more? Like, why they were there? Like, how did you feel?
I didn't really. I was curious to know why. But it was normal for me to have experiences like that when I was asleep. I have very vivid dreams. I have tons of dream journals, which I need to start doing again. So I never really knew what it was. And then, of course, Whitley Strieber comes out with this lovely movie called Communion. And I started reading his books and started getting obsessed about it and started wondering, what if it's that, because I thought maybe it was a spirit. I wasn't sure, because just like you, when you were younger, your first experience was with your grandfather. Mine was with my great grandmother, who I never knew. And she came to me when I was like 4 years old, in a dream. But I thought it was a dream, but I don't think it was. I mean, she literally sat down and talked to me. So, yeah.
That was kind of similar to my experience too with my grandfather. And did you have a download? Because I mean, I had a download. It was almost like he was giving me all his information. It was really weird. Did you have anything like that?
I think it was kind of similar to that. I don't think I got a huge amount. Since I was 4, I don't remember a lot of it. And my whole life, I've always just kind of blocked stuff out. So it's really hard for me to even find that information. It's somewhere there. I don't know where it is, but I remember the feelings that went along with it. But I have experienced when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was really having a hard time with my life, depression and all that. And she came back twice, and I was asleep, and she gave me this huge hug, and it was like total euphoria. I was asleep though, but I literally thought someone came in my room, gave me a hug. And I think the second time that it happened, I was actually at my other grandmother's house, and I got up and I said, "So when did Grandma come into her room?" And she's like, "Well, she didn't come into her room." And I'm like, "Somebody came into the bedroom and gave me a big hug." I was like, "Nope, nobody did." And she even said something too, and I can't remember exactly what she said to me, but it was Christmas. So when I go to my other grandmother's house, I open her gift, and it's this nice little sun catcher thing. And it's exactly what she said to me, which is actually her daughter.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that our story sounds similar. And it's one of the, like, you kind of spend your whole life kind of like, what did that mean? It's like one of those things that kind of like always haunts you. And I decided, like, I finally decided, you know what? Like, I have the gift. I have to start working the muscle. And that's kind of, I fought it my whole life. I really did. I fought it. I didn't want this. I didn't want. I wanted to be able to have a normal life where people, like, where I just can walk into a room and I didn't see a ghost. I just wanted to have like a normal life, and I just had to accept that I'm weird, and which is perfect for this podcast, right? Like, I'm a freak, though it's okay,
Yes, exactly.
Do you think maybe children are more receptive to these things, and then sometimes something deadens those senses as we grow in the world?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like my little niece Aubrey, she's gifted, so it does pass through the family. And so she, like, when my stepfather passed, she had this message, like, she's like, Pop's in heaven, he says this and he says that. I'm like, Aubrey, and she was 3 years old, and like, I'm like, how do you know all this information? And she also said something. I was showing her my book, and there was a picture of me walking up the stairs, holding a lantern, and she's like, Uncle Sam, she's like, you walk up to the attic, you see a bloody hand, and you're screaming on the inside. And I'm like, how do you know that? And I'm like, because I walk up the stairs, it's this old historic home, I see a bloody handprint on the wall, and it turns out that was like a makeshift hospital. And I was screaming on the inside. I'm like, my little niece, no one told her that story. Like, it was something only I knew. Wow. And so I think she's gifted. I think that I was with them during the holidays, and I did notice sort of a change in her. Like as you get older and you get more conditioned, like you go to school and like the teachers are like, Aubrey, you can't, like that's crazy. Like I think that we're conditioned not to believe in ghosts. She also had imaginary friends too. Like she had a girl, Emily, that was her imaginary friend, and Emily had hollowed out eyes, and I'm like, Aubrey, that's not a good imaginary friend. I mean, like my imaginary friend was like this. Like I had my grandfather was my imaginary friend, and I would communicate with him. And I also had like a neighborhood, like a kid that would kind of visit me as well. But her imaginary friends were potentially like evil. So I did notice like the little girl, because I did see the little girl before, and she had hollowed out eyes. So I look out for her because I think that the kids, they are more receptive, but they also can bring in the dark stuff too. So you have to be really, really careful with the children when they're communicating with spirits, because sometimes the darker energies will go to the children because it's easy prey almost. And so I really, with Aubrey, I gave her a protection stone. I do like a crystal shield of protection I do around her in her house, just to make sure she doesn't attract the darker energies, because she, just like me as a child, she's having spirits like walk up to her and she's not sure like what's a human and what's not, and they're like her friends and all. I'm like, oh, that's crazy. It's a little scary, it's like but yeah, so I really have worked on protection with her, definitely.
Tell us a little bit about haunted hotels as well, Sam. We haven't talked at all about that yet.
Well, I have worked for various haunted hotels, including the latest one that I'm working at is Concord's Colonial Inn. So I started working there recently, but that Concord's Colonial Inn is featured in my book, Ghosts of the American Revolution. And it's right by Northbridge, where the battles of Concord and Lexington took place. So it's like right in that the American Revolutionary Wars shot her around the world. I also have worked in hotels in Quincy and Salem and Boston, and a lot of the locations that I worked at were haunted. And I also like to travel a lot. So a lot of the locations that that I visited, I always end up like some of the most haunted hotels in the world, like the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, to Farnsworth House. There's haunted hotels in Florida. So I've been all over the country. I'm like, you know what? Let's turn this into a podcast. So what I do is I actually every week I interview somebody who specializes or has been to a haunted hotel, and they talk about their haunted hotel experience. And it's been a great show. It comes out every Thursday, and it's on the My Paranormal Network is that's the name of the network that it's on. And I've had some great interviews. We had Shane Pittman on from the Holzer Files. We had Brandon Elvis, who was recently on the show, and some great episodes coming up. And that show is pre-recorded, so if there's I can record it anytime. So I can record, be out in the field. I can even be working at the Concord's Colonial Inn. Turn on the computer, do an interview like that, and I'm able to kind of go to some of the really haunted hotels while I'm reporting, interviewing these people about the hotels.
Do you have one top pick or one most frightening event you've ever experienced in a hotel you could share with us?
Yeah, so the experience that I was kind of alluding to before, so in Salem, Massachusetts, I worked at a hotel that I can't name the name. And a lot of times you'll find that the hotels, they don't want to be known as a haunted hotel because it scares away guests. Mm-hmm. So this hotel supposedly was not haunted, but we're talking about Salem, Massachusetts, which is one of the most haunted cities in the world. So I was working the overnight shift, and there was what appeared to be like a black smoke that was in the lobby of the hotel. And I thought maybe because there was construction that was happening downstairs, so I thought maybe it was like smoke, like soot that was rising above, and kind of was like a black cloud of soot maybe. But the thing is, the black cloud goes into the elevator and then it goes down to the basement. And I'm like, so like the black cloud took an elevator ride at this hotel in Salem. And I'm like, and also too, like you have to have a special code to go down to the basement. So I'm like, okay, someone's playing a trick on me. They know that I'm the ghost guy of Salem. So they're like this has to be a joke. So I go downstairs. I follow the black smoke that took an elevator ride down to the basement. The basement was under construction, so there was a lot of tarps and sawdust and all sorts of things. So it was really scary. And then as I was walking down the hall, the lights started like kind of like a runway. So the lights were lighting up as I was going down the hallway. I'm like, this has got to be a joke. It's like, this is so terrifying. This cannot be real. And so I go all the way and I hear what sounds like a moaning, like someone was like, oh, I'm like, okay, all right, trickster, I know that this cannot be real. And this is like 3 a.m. So this person had to have stayed up really late to play this joke. So then I hear it like a loud banging on metal. And I'm like, okay, it's not downstairs, it's got to be upstairs. So I run upstairs, I look outside and into the window of the store next door, and I look into the window, and that's when I see the man with the hat. And that was the beginnings of my relationship with the man wearing the hat. I connected with him. He was like, can you see me? And I'm like, I can see you. And I was frozen in fear, and it had red glowing eyes. That's the thing that still terrifies me thinking about it. Every time I talk about him, my computer dies. So I try not to talk about this, but that is the most terrifying situation at a hotel that I've had.
Do you relate that entity to other people's talk of the Hat Man?
I don't think it's the Hat Man. In fact, there's a trademark on the Hat Man. Heidi Hollis has a trademark.
Oh,
so
okay.
I think it's a human spirit wearing a hat. or I think it's because I'm actually friends with her on Facebook, and if I mention the man, but I have to be honest, the entity was wearing a hat. So is it the Hat Man? I hope not. It looked like it was 1600s era garb. Okay. And I asked myself, what did it feel like when I first interacted with him? And it felt like it was a human. It was a really upset human, but it didn't feel like an inhuman entity. But the part that still scares me is the red glowing eyes. So that's where I'm like, okay, human, inhuman, human, inhuman, inhuman, because he had red glowing eyes. That to me is like a sign of something that's a little darker.
Yeah, it's not a good sign, I don't think. Those red glowing eyes.
Did you see any facial features, or was he just complete shadow?
It was so the hat looked like a pilgrim. So when they actually did a reenactment on this on a show called Paranormal Nightshift, and so they were like, "What did he look like?" And I'm like, "He kind of looked like a pilgrim." And so they had this like in the recreation, they had this sort of like this pilgrim. I'm like, that is not what he looked like. It was like this like this kind of cranky pilgrim, like and I'm like, that is not what the entity looked like. It almost but he it was black as black. He had a hat, kind of like a Zorro hat, but the hat did look like a pilgrim's hat, and it had red glowing eyes. It did have like a cloak on, so you can see like a collar on it too. I don't. That's a lot to see like within a period of time, but I've seen him multiple times, and I've also seen him out. It was just in Salem during this period I was giving tours, so I would see him periodically just in Salem and never outside of Salem. But I recently have seen him in other locations outside of Salem.
Have you been able to get any information from him, or is he just?
Yeah, so we did. We did it like a kind of like the Estes method. Actually, we did it in Hawthorne Hotel, and also too, COVID's really kind of put in kind of like a hurdle in a lot of investigation, because I normally work with people that during this period, like we had to do it remotely, and I had to I was doing the Estes method with my friend Dana Mason, who's a high priestess witch. She was kind of protecting me throughout the whole process, and I was channeling the entity. He walks into the room, and he like the doors. You can hear the door slam behind me, and she asked him like, "What do you want from Sam?" And she's like, and the entity said, "Energy. I want his energy." So it's feeding off my energy. And once I figured out like what was going on, it was kind of like feeding off my fear. Like it was almost like I have to learn how to not be afraid. And so I stopped. I stopped actually going to Salem, which is sad because I love Salem. But I also felt really drained when every time I went to Salem, I worked there, I gave tours there, I worked the overnight shift at a hotel there. I just felt so drained when I went to Salem, and I don't like feeling that way. So during COVID, I took a kind of like a Salem break, and we'll see if I'm able to go back. But I haven't really had that experience with the Hatman. Like I was having it pretty frequently after that experience. It was about 5 years ago when I first had that experience.
There's often the sense that some areas are, certainly in the writings of people like John Keel, for example, that some areas are window areas and they have more than one phenomenon. So have you ever studied an area which is particularly haunted by what might be spirits or something spiritual, but there's also tales of perhaps saucer sightings or Bigfoot or other anomalous type phenomena?
Yeah, I mean, like I was a journalist before I was a paranormal author. So I'm big in immersion journalism. So I work at Conker's Colonial Inn, not for the money, but for immersion journalism. So I'm there because I think that I want to be there if something happens, like a Bigfoot sighting in Concord. But yeah, I think Salem is a perfect example of multiple types of phenomenon that happen in Salem. There have been UFO reports in Salem. There's been all sorts of things that people report. And I do think that there may be what we call ley lines in Salem that go down Essex Street. So I think a lot of it, I think that maybe the hysteria in 1692 may have been actually paranormal activity that caused the hysteria. I mean, a lot of the people that, some of them I'm actually related to, like Ann Putnam Jr., they were having visions of people, tormenting them. So so they may have been clairvoyant, and they just were like misusing their abilities as a clairvoyant. Yeah. So I look at the witch trials hysteria as like maybe there was a paranormal element to it, because there was a ghost pig. I mean, like there were like animals that had faces of people on it. It was all these crazy things that they were seeing, and like they said that was from the devil, that was witchcraft. But maybe it was something that was actually what we experience now in Salem, which is paranormal related stuff.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. So, Sam, how can people get a hold of your books and check out what you're up to? And can you let us know a few URLs, and also let us know about any upcoming projects people should be aware of?
Sure. So I am at sambaltrusis.com. It's BALTRUSIS.com. I am up for several big events coming up. The most recent one is the Rochester Winterfest coming up at the end of March. But I'm going to be at the Vulture City Paracon. I'm going to be at the Sleepy Hollow Paracon. And I plan to do multiple events depending on sort of COVID this next year. And I also... I'm a producer on a TV show called A Haunting, and A Haunting is airing on the Travel Channel at 10 p.m. Eastern Time every Friday night for the next 8 weeks. We've already seen 3 episodes so far, and the episodes that I produce are coming up, so I'm really excited about that. And also you can go to discoveryplus.com to see season 11 of A Haunting. Plus, you can see my episode, guys. I know you haven't seen it. It's called Provoking Evil, the 100th episode of A Haunting.
Well, you were just an absolutely fascinating guest, Sam. I should leave the last thing to Jen if she wants to ask anything else, because I know, I mean, I was excited you were coming on, but she was super excited that you were coming on.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about like the Fae or anything like that. Have you experienced anything like that?
Like what? Where were they talking about? The Fae?
The Fae, elementals,
like the fair folk, the other neighbor, the good folk, the
good neighbors, fairies, gnomes.
Fairies.
Yeah, I mean, so when we were out in the woods, so Chris Fleming, who I worked with, he's very much into the Fae and the elementals. We have what are called puckwudgies in New England, and so puckwudgies are little small creatures that are elemental in nature, and they spit at you and they throw dirt at you and all that. And I've never experienced them personally, but I know multiple people who have. But I do think that when it comes to elemental energies, it's in like the Bridgewater Triangle area. And it's also the Lizzie Borden house actually is on the outskirts of the Bridgewater Triangle, and also the Freetown State Forest. So when you see the Curse of Lizzie Borden, when I'm going out in the woods, we were encountered multiple elementals out in those woods. So yes, I definitely have experienced it, and they liked me. So they kept coming up that they didn't like everybody else in the group. They loved me for some reason. And I'm like, why are they circling around me? And I'm like, they keep like circling. It was terrifying. But they probably loved the fear that I was emitting from my body because I was so scared.
Yeah. No.
They're like feeding off of it.
Well, I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be in good with the fair folk, I think. So, so it's probably just as well.
Yeah.
But again, you were an amazing guest. We've got to get you back on sometime, Sam. But until we see you again, keep it weird.
I will. No problems there.
Should I end with like the intro since I began?
End with the intro since we started with the outro.
I know. I jacked it all up.
Take care, Sam.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.